How are you?
Good morning, find yourself. Thank you for having me here today.
It's a pleasure. Bradley, tell me a little bit more about yourself, your position, and your company.
Okay, so I'm a franchisee in the Pest Control Specialist Franchise Group, and I own a pest control branch in the Vaal area and in the Pietermaritzburg Midlands area of South Africa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and being our guest this morning. It's really been a very interesting Friday, and I know it's going to be an awesome weekend if the Friday starts as interesting as this. Okay, Bradley, my first question to you is, how do you go about determining what services a company need? If a company phones you and say that they need pest control services, what is the process that you follow and how do you determine what they actually need?
Okay, so that's fairly simple. There's two major factors. The first one would be a visual inspection. We physically go to site and do an inspection, understanding what current infestations there may be, but more importantly, what risks of future infestations are. That would be the guiding line to start with. Then one would look at the building itself, and is it conducive to pest control, or does it have risks where pests may enter? Once we understand that, the other factor would then obviously be the auditing criteria. There's various auditing bodies and criteria out there, so we want to understand where the client falls within that so that we can meet those standards and help them through an audit as well. Combine that and we can put together a good program.
Awesome. So you look at the whole package in terms of, so therefore, when you go out, you're aware of if they go for FSCC 22 certification or for BRC, or if it's just a retailer audit, whichever one of the retailers, you've got a very clear idea and understanding of what the different requirements are. And then according to that, you keep it in mind when you do the assessment?
100%. So in terms of general pest control, between all those different standards, it's fairly simple, but there are different document and record keeping that we would have to put in place just to tick the boxes on certain of the requirements, although they're fairly, for the most part, overlap each other. But yeah, that's a major thing out there. So what we find is that on certain sites, the pest control issues are of such a low issue rate that we don't really worry about that, but we do worry about the audit standards so the client can get their certifications and operate and trade in essence.
Yes, and what would you say, what are the challenges you find with new clients? Is there specific challenges or like a consistent thing that if you go and see new clients that happens, and even with old clients?
Yeah, so it's interesting with old and new, we tend to have the same type of issues, and the two major ones that stand out are the culture, the way the guys operate on site in terms of hygiene and keeping the place clean and neat and pest unfriendly, if you want to put it that way. And then the other things that one would look at is the building itself. So you often have a client that's renting from a landlord, and they have little control over the building, to, that as far as pest control goes. So rodents and things do have access. So if you can negotiate those correctly, then you can minimize the risk going forward.
Absolutely. And what are the general type of findings that you would write down from a pest control site when you go to the different sites? What is a general type of finding that you guys get?
The biggest challenge that we get, and it boils over to findings from an auditor as well. I think we're on the same page there. It's a lot of it has got to do with housekeeping. I think that the education and the info sharing out there has maybe been limited in the past, and the clients don't always understand the impacts of packing a shelf specifically. So if a shelf is packed against the wall and the boxes are leaning against the wall and all the way to the floor, there's a major pest risk behind that. If it can be lifted off the floor and brought forward, for instance, that problem is 70% less. So just the education out there would make a massive impact. So in terms of auditing, if those findings should be adhered to or taken note of, and not just seen as a problem, but seen as a learning curve, and then things would get better going forward.
Yes, and if you say housekeeping, like what is you've mentioned now the shelves, the packing of the shelves specifically, but what other areas are focus areas where you always relate it back to housekeeping? In which general areas is that?
So housekeeping and the culture of a client is interesting because people don't always put the two together with pest control. So if you look at a good housekeeping regime, what are you allowing into your house? So in other words, what is coming into your storeroom and so on? So you would want to have some kind of a plan or a process to check the stock before it arrives, because pellets can often bring in the pest. Then you want to look at your cleaning processes. Are you cleaning just to look good from the surface, or are you going behind the equipment, behind the tables? And that's normally where the pests are hiding, and that's where the bits of food are falling in and creating the risk. So if you can look at things like that, and along with things like we mentioned, our packaging and packing up your storeroom, if you take that combination and put it together, it's 70% of pest control is then taken care of.
Yes, yeah. And something that I often found when I will still do auditing is, for some other reason, most places normally have, I called it a graveyard. All those, I'm not going to sell this equipment, or maybe I'm going to use this equipment again, or whatever. Do you also often get that type of scenario where people are hoarding things and not realizing, because there's no movement, what that impact is?
It's a huge problem, and what happens is that unused section or that storage section that doesn't really get touched because everything gets jammed in there. The result is that there's a space hidden away where pests are not disturbed. They can breed freely, and it creates a big problem. So the knock-on effects of something like that is big. So I think from a pest control point of view, our biggest effects that we can create is not through use of chemicals. It's through use of communicating and talking to the customer. And most of our pest control process is monitoring. So when you have good monitoring systems in place, and you can show the customer, look what's going on here, and explain to them where the risks are, where the activity tends to pick up, you can normally explain to them that those kinds of areas are causing the problem. And with time, they'll see it because you can provide the evidence from your monitoring systems.
Yeah.
Where the pathogens are.
Do you often get calls from your clients and they say to you, please, we need you to come in because we've got to audit in a week, or we've got to audit in a few days. Please come, our services or our file is not up to date. Do you often get those type of calls?
The answer is a bit of a yes and no. So previously, historically, yes, that was the pattern. But we've tried to move away from that and try and create a system that's constantly running and running well throughout the periods in between audits. And so what we at the Specialist Franchise Group have, we've got an online audit file. And with that, it opens up a lot of transparency. You are on site, you are scanning permanently, that data is being captured up, all the activity levels and chemicals used, all that gets captured as you are doing your daily job. So that takes away that risk of something going missing or something being forgotten. Plus, it makes the patterns visible. So the auditing side, they can see that you were there just before the audit, or they can see that you've done a good program for the last 3 or 4 months. So everything becomes a little bit more transparent, which means that you have to run a good program to be able to pass the audit. It also means that your pest control effects and what you're doing is measured daily. And the auditor has access to that, the owner of the business has access to that, the management from the pest control side have access to that. So everybody can see what is going on at any point in time. So it takes away that little rush before the audit, and it is conducive to good practice.
Yes, and I think in that, it's also it's more friendlier towards the environment because, the paperless environment. Is it easy for auditors to sign in? Is there always challenges in terms of on the day that they want to do the audit to sign in, or is it quite a user-friendly platform?
We find it quite a user-friendly platform for new companies that have come on board, both within new branches within our franchise group, as well as clients that have come on board, as well as auditors that come on board. So, we all need to be able to log in and use it. it's a web-based system, so you basically log in with a username and password. And the nice thing with that is, on a paper system, you look at a piece of paper, and that information is all you can see. On a cloud-based system, that data is all sitting there. So you can pull various reports, you can drill down to one specific monitoring station, you can get an overview for an area or for the full site or certain stations. So your use of the data is much more advanced and much more usable. It's data that we actually need to operate on site that we are now making available to everybody to see. So I think the feedback we've got so far is positive. People are moving towards that, and people are requesting it, and people are actually now. We find that I went to a client the other day, and we were busy taking over, and I explained the system to them, and that was the final straw, as it were, that got us in and let us take over the site, because that's what the clients are looking for.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. I think anything that makes it more that it's not so dependent on a piece of paper needed to be filled in and filed and all of that, it does make it easier. Coming back to the people that go out to the different sites, the PCO certificate or the P number, is there value in it? I can recall a few years back, I don't know if it's still the same, there was challenges in issuing these numbers, and there was a backlog on the systems. And is this now up to date? And should each person that presents your company that goes onto site, are they supposed to have a valid certificate with this number? And why? What is the need for that to have?
Okay, so under the law in South Africa, we fall under an act that dictates you have to have that. So by law, you have to have a valid P number, which is a registration with the Department of Agriculture, Forestries and Fisheries, or DAF, who we fall under. So to legally use the chemical, transport the chemical, apply it in a public space, and even buy the chemical, you have to have this registration. The registration means you've gone through a certain process of learning, and you are now qualified.
Yes.
So that's the one side. There's also various sections under that P number, so you can qualify in various segments of pest control. For weed control or wood destroying organisms, or you can specialize now in the food safety industry. So you've got to have that training, but you also got to have the right categories to be able to be, from a practical point of view, to be effective, to know what you're doing, know which chemicals can be used where, to understand the auditing criteria of all the different standards. But also from a safety point of view, if you don't know which one to use, you could create more risk than you are solving risk. So the whole idea of a pest management program is to push public health and to make sure that the end user is protected at the end of the day. So if you're coming in with all kinds of crazy chemicals, you're not, it's not conducive to good health. So you would like to have a proper qualification and training to be able to serve our clients best.
For instance, for fumigation, is that also a specific category under that, or can anybody fumigate?
No, it's specific. So you'll have a basic structural pest control number, and then from there you would develop into those categories. But fumigation is a very specific one, because you're going to be using all kinds of gases, and the risk that goes with that is high. People can be killed from that, and it has happened where people were not qualified or not trained correctly. So it's absolutely vital that, from a customer's point of view, that they check the credentials of the pest controller, the operator, and the company that they're dealing with, to make sure they've got someone that knows what they're doing, that is of the right standard. Chemicals are a scary word out there. People don't want chemicals in the environment, and although we agree, we don't want chemicals in the environment, to a certain degree they are necessary in terms of control, to control pathogens, which are more dangerous. But you don't want to create a secondary problem. So you really want to make sure, from a customer point of view, that your pest control company knows what they're talking about, that they're correctly qualified and suited to minimize risk out there in the public space.
Absolutely, because I think it's dangerous, because should something go into product, not only you, but the pest control company will also be kept, to say that they created it. So it definitely does make sense. From your side, what 2 tips or 3 tips per you know, our normal flies, cockroaches, fruit flies, and mice. What type of basic tips can you give the listeners in terms of what they're supposed to focus on?
Okay, so whether you're a big food industry with serious auditing criteria or just at your home, there's 2 big things that you would want to focus on, and the one is good hygiene. You know, if you are a pest, you are looking for food, you are looking for housing, and you're looking for water, as do we. So if you can make sure there's no food lying around or hidden behind a counter or, you know, underneath something, and there's no water or leaking taps or anything standing around, and there's no place for the pest to make a house or a nest, you have dramatically reduced your risk or your attraction value to bring the pest in the first place. The other thing is the building. If you can look at proofing, you know, in other words, keeping the pest out. If you've got a screen over your window, the fly can't enter. If the fly can't enter, you will never have a problem. So, you know, you're always looking at those 2 things, and they can be very practical and simple. You just put a extension at the bottom of the door. Now suddenly rodents can't enter your building, and you have no rodent problem. So very simple, practical, logical steps, and big results.
Definitely. And then what should you actually do if you realize that you've got an infestation? And what constitutes an infestation? I mean, you know, if I see one cockroach, I feel, you know, I don't want, I need to do something. But what is the steps a person should follow if they realize, listen, I really now have got an infestation problem? Is it a once-off thing that you do, or what is the procedure that you follow to rectify something like that?
I think the important thing is to always establish, first of all, what is a pest? You know, insects in general are not pests. We need insects. They are vital for our survival. So we don't want to just go and kill insects because they're bothering the people. We want to make sure it's actually a valid pest. There's a health risk or economic risk, or there's a fear factor risk. You know, some people are absolutely terrified of certain things. So then you could call it now a pest. Once you've established that, we need to know what pest we are dealing with. So a good identification is right. You know, if you're talking of flies, flies are not just flies in our point of view. Flies are very different. You've got a fruit fly, which is going for fresh fruit. So then you've got a supply chain problem, or you've got a vinegar fly, which is going on fermenting fruit, which means you've got a hygiene or a cleanliness problem. You know, especially in a restaurant, maybe getting rid of old fruits or so from a bar specifically. So if you understand what fly you've got, you understand why it's there, then you can understand what was the attraction, and you can eliminate that, you know, and most likely solve the problem. You also then understand how, if you understand what pest you got, how would it have got in, and then you can try and close the building off. Then only you choose the right chemicals to try and minimize future risk.
So what you're saying is dependent on the type of insect that you've got. Like you said, you don't classify all as insect. That in a way gives you the indication of where they came from or why they're there. And then you also look for the point of you know, where their breeding started.
Yeah, I think it's very important to understand the biology of the pest that you're dealing with, because then you know what kind of risk you're dealing with. So it's interesting you mentioned one cockroach just now. So if you have one cockroach and it happens to be a female, and if she's carrying an egg case, which they carry once a month almost for a few days, that egg case can give you, depending on which literature and training you're going through, about 48 eggs. So if you leave that in a month's time, you've got 48 cockroaches that are already start breeding. So, you know, one cockroach is a problem. Whereas on other things, it might not be as serious. One ant is not as serious as one cockroach because of the way they breed in their biology. So a good understanding of your pest biology, good understanding of the risk, and you know, you've got to look at these things. And then also, I'd like to mention, you know, if you look at potential risk, if you're in the food industry, you know, at home, I find when I've got an ant, and then we take it from there. But in the food industry, you want to look at what could arrive and how could it arrive, and you want to prevent it, because, you know, like the saying goes, prevention is better than cure. So you really want to put a good preventative program in place to make sure that you don't have pests coming in, and when they do that, you can pick it up and react quickly before that infestation becomes a problem.
No, definitely. And I think, like you say, the life cycle, just something interesting. but what I heard, and I mean, you would be the person to tell me, is it true that a cockroach can breathe underwater and that's the reason why they come through your sewer system? Is there truth in that?
Yes and no. So technically, no, they can't breathe underwater. They need air. But you know, it's very easy to have a bubble of air around the cockroach itself. I've seen very small insects living in a bubble in water for quite a long time. So there's very easy ways for them to survive down there. If you can get out of the water and go into the rest of the sewage system, you can run on those pipes upside down. There's plenty of food and moisture, and they can breathe quite well there. So it just takes a bit of an air bubble, and he can travel quite far underwater and pop out inside your premises.
Okay, now it makes sense what you are saying. So I'm sure of it, and I would love you to share with us. I'm sure of it, you've got some funny stories that you've seen in your lifetime of visiting premises. Would you like to share one of those with us?
Okay, well, one that comes to mind is we were quoting a client that the auditor actually sent us there because they didn't have anything in place. Okay, so now the client had a very clean premises, and he was saying there's no pest activity, so there was no reason to pay for pest control. And we were saying, you know, you want to prevent any pests from coming in down the line, and that's why you need pest control. And we were having this discussion. Yeah, you want to keep it that way. You want to prevent risk, future risk.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to spend money on something that wasn't a problem at the time. So we were having this negotiation, but he was absolutely adamant that there's no pests. So we mentioned to him, you know, the neighbor down the line, we've picked up a few issues with, and we've solved it. But you know, so they are in the area, and once again, adamant, no rats, no nothing. So my manager at the time sort of leaned on the cupboard next to him. You know, it was casual conversation, and when he put his hand up on whatever he was leaning on, he felt something there. When he pulled it, he actually pulled a rat's tail. And it was a dead rat at the end of the day, which was quite unfair. So needless to say, we started that contract quite quickly after that.
I can imagine. I must say, I always, as an auditor, for some or other reason, it just always worked that way. You know, when I would go into a storeroom, I would see cockroaches, and then, you know, the manager's first reaction is always, I can't believe this. You know, I've never seen one. And then I always made a joke, and I said to them, yes, the cockroaches, all the insects are used to the vibration of my voice. So as soon as they hear that, they come out to come and say hello. But yeah, is there anything else that you feel is important that you would like to share with the people? And on that, if there's anybody that's got a question, you know, that you would like to ask Bradley around pest control services, please put your hand up, and then, you know, we can ask Bradley. But if there's not any, Bradley, from your side, any specific, you know, comments that you want to make that is important for the listeners?
I'd just like to mention that I don't think everyone always understands the risk that pests play. There's a major public health impact from these pests. Cockroaches, rodents, and flies specifically carry a lot of pathogens, and that's where a lot of outbreaks come from. They actually say that I don't know what the exact figures and how they measure these things, but they're talking about more than 60% of people that are off from work have got some kind of connection to a pest pathogen that was carried by a pest. Food poisoning, for instance, 99% of food poisoning is actually pest related, because that's how the pathogen gets in the first place. So it's actually a vital role that we play in home or you know, the food industry. And as it being so important, it's very important from a customer's point of view to make sure that they have got the right pest control company, that they have the right training and credentials to be able to look after you as a client, and to make sure that ultimately the public is safe. So always check who you're dealing with.
No, definitely. And I also feel that, you know, it's a network of people that's utilized, that the owners of a business is utilizing to ensure that they pass their audits and, you know, make sure that they maintain their certifications. And at the end of the day, therefore, that relationship and that network that you build with your pest control company is so important, because that all makes your platform stronger to ensure that your culture, like you've mentioned, and everything works together so that you can keep your certification. I see that Rodney has got a question. So Rodney, I'm going to unmute you. You're self-muted. Rodney, you can ask your question. You self-muted, just unmute. Rodney. Okay, let me see if he maybe typed his question. He said, not sure if this was covered as I got disconnected. How does one verify or confirm that a pest control company is fully certified, registered, or licensed? I think that comes down to not only the PCO, but there's other documentation as well that's involved. Rodney, can you please, Bradley, can you please explain or answer Rodney's question?
Okay, so just to touch on the PIN number, that's a registration for the operator himself, that he's certified and can do it. The PIN number paperwork as such is not enough. Look at the category. Does it fall under, are you doing a fumigation? Does he have a fumigation license? Just make sure he's got the right qualification for that job. The company itself, there's a few things you want to look at. In South Africa, we've got the Pest Control Association of South Africa, and to be a member there, you have to have certain standards and apply by certain rules. So then you're dealing with a company that's of a certain standard, and should they deviate, there's recourse. You can take it up with somebody. You can raise the issue. So those are two things that you would really want to check and make sure that if they have those two things, at least you have an above board operator and company. You can also look at things like insurances and things.
Yes, I can recall, I think in most of the audits, there's specific criteria in terms of insurance, a letter of good standing to make sure, that the occupational health and safety risks and all those things, are also looked at. So in your profile, there's definitely those type of documentations that you can ask the pest control company for, that they would need to be able to present to you. Rodney, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for your time, Bradley. Have a wonderful afternoon, and to all the listeners, thank you very much. And from Food Focus, have a blessed Friday and a good weekend and a safe weekend. Keep well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Well, bye-bye.
Thanks, Bradley. Bye-bye.
Thank you.